What's good, everybody? I'm Jędrek, he's Sodek, and today we are here to talk about the most exciting cards from Dominaria United for Modern and Pioneer. Let's go. Alrighty, so for the last two sets, or three even, I believe, second Innistrad, Kamigawa, and Capena, we did make our top 10 most impactful cards for Modern. But because of the reinvigorated interest in Pioneer, we've decided to split our attention between those two formats. And because we don't want this video to have like 2 hours long, we do have top 5 lists for both of those formats instead of top 10. And I think, at least for Modern, it's kinda better anyways, because the set isn't very deep for Modern, in my opinion. I think Sodek shares this sentiment. When we were discussing our list, we both mentioned that that's the case. But for Pioneer, like my long list for Pioneer, I basically, every time I have this spoiler season, I'm looking through the spoiler and I'm typing in my Excel file or my notepad every card that I think might be vaguely on the list, like even slightest possibility to be on. And my Modern list was like 10 cards or 15. And the first 5 are always so easy to dismiss because like it's just, for example, the spoiler, the 5 mana gorilla that Canister said, oh, it might be good in Amulet, the mythic 5/7. I don't know how it's called, Silverback something. And like those type of cards that will be dismissed almost instantly, but I do want to stack them up against the rest of the cards. And my Pioneer list was like 30 cards or something. Once again, half of them was dismissed very easily, but the remaining 15 or something were kind of close. And we are cheating in some fashion because we do have Painlands grouped together, which is pretty typical with lands, but we also have Lords grouped together for Pioneer. So without any further ado, let's start with Modern because we have less to talk about Modern, and it's also our primary format. So we have 4 honorable mentions, 2 from each of us. So the first one from Sodek is Leaf Crowned Visionary. It's an Elf Lord, costs 2 green mana, 1/1, Elf Druid. Other elves you control gets +1/+1, and whenever you cast an elf spell, you may pay green. If you do, draw a card. What do you think about this card, Sodek?
The card's potential is quite high in my opinion, because like all tribal decks in Modern right now has a huge problem with Fury, because this is a card that single-handedly can take out like 3 of the creatures and the game is virtually over. Like tribal decks need some support to come back to the format, and this cycle of lords is exactly what tribal decks needed. The question is which one will be the best and will serve maybe some other purposes than only being good against Fury. And as much as I love elves as an archetype, I still don't believe that having a leaf crowned visionary will change that much, but it's a really solid upgrade. Right now we have leaf crowned visionary, but we'll have like 2 weeks from now or 1 week, and we have like other card advantage cards like Realm Walker, Collected Company, and just other elves that generate tokens, for example. So there are multiple ways to generate card advantage from elves, which is something new compared to elves from like 4 or 5 years ago. And I strongly believe that we are in a position when elves can beat 1 or 2 pieces of removal, and this won't be very strange, especially if you can like replace your Elvish Mystic draw later in the game with a fresh card attached to it, because like elves usually have a lot of mana. You have mana dorks, you have Elvish Druid, other important stuff. So like this extra ability outside of being an anthem will be, in my opinion, very relevant. Also, the fact that it's a lord for 2 mana, that's showing the power creep, because generally, like, outside Lord of Atlantis and Master of Earth Tribal, in Merfolks, we haven't seen that many 2-mana lords.
Yeah,
With
they
Hero of
were
the Game.
either for like very unpopular tribes, or the last elf lord is also a 2-mana elvish clan color.
Yeah, and like
But
we
yeah.
can see the change. Like years ago, lords were for 3 mana. Right now, we are printing them for 2, and not like, okay, let's give some elf some support and give them 1 lord. It's a full cycle of 2-mana lords. So this is a strong signal that Wizards want to help take
Yes.
tribal decks a bit. Will it be enough? We'll see. But I'm always happy to see these tribe decks around.
Yes, specifically about Leaf Crown Visionary, I have a few more things to say. So I definitely agree with Sodek that it's a valuable piece of card advantage engine, and being a creature is really big, because back in the day you had to pick and choose between those instances and sorceries that can get you card advantage, and you can't run too many of those because you're a creature deck and you have Collected Company or Lead the Stampede. So every single of these non-creature card advantage engines cared about the density of creatures in your deck. So having something that can, like having your one card advantage engine like Company, get you another one in Leaf Crown Visionary or Realm Walker is pretty huge. And Leaf Crown Visionary plays especially well, I think, in the face of any type of sweeper effect. Even we can classify Fury as a sweeper effect in this case, because you can recoup most of your cards by just playing slightly slower game and draw cards with every elf. And it's important to note how hard it is to fizzle now with Realm Walker and Leaf Crown Visionary, because you basically don't have to pay extra mana if you have a creature on top of your deck, and you will know if you have a creature on top of your deck after you play it. Like if you play a creature from the top of your deck from Realm Walker, you will see the fresh card before you have to decide whether you want to pay green mana. So if that's another creature, you effectively drew it anyway, so you don't have to pay the extra mana. But if it's a land, you can draw and then clear the top of your deck. So I think that's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next card that Sodek has from his honorable mentions, it's Shana Purifying Blade. It costs 1 of each banned mana. It's a legendary creature, human warrior, lifelink, free. At the beginning of your end step, you may pay X. If you do, draw X card, and X can't be greater than the amount of life you gain this turn. So the floor of this card is you untap with it, you attack for free, you gain free life of lifelink, and then you draw 3 cards. Why did you pick this card, Sodek?
I picked this because the floor is extremely high. In my opinion, okay, it's a free drop, free that can die to Lightning Bolt, but
And that's the
if
floor.
yes,
The floor is it dies
But-
for 1 mana.
that happens. But you know the selling is very very high. Like this card can, like, if you are in a top deck war, you always want to have this one. If you can protect this, it can single-handedly win the game because you can draw cards. If you, for example, have this, play Omnat, fetch, game for life, and end step crack the fetch land and draw 4 cards, that's a game-ending effect. I don't know if there's a deck in Modern right now that will support this card enough, and maybe it will be better in Pioneer, who knows. But in my opinion, the card has a potential to do things.
Yeah.
And like I again, I don't know if banned company decks can be good in Modern at the moment, but if I would start if I wanted to play banned, I would try for sure to have like 2 or 3 copies of this card in the deck.
Okay, I think it's a definition almost of a win more card. If you, especially with Omnath, like this synergy is very strong that you said that you talked about, but it is a win more because it is basically a scenario when an Omnath player has Omnath, can generate mana with it, and they get to draw more cards, which is what they are doing anyways. So we are not like alleviating issues that are actually problematic for Omnath. And other than that, the cost is kind of steep. It doesn't really have a deck, and I don't think it's like strong enough to warrant building a deck around it, but maybe in Pioneer. We'll see. There's a banned humans deck in Pioneer already, so and it's a human. And it scales pretty well with Lords, because you will get to draw more cards. Okay, so I have 2 honorable mentions of my own. The first one is Gaia's Might. It's an instant for 1 green mana, and it has domain. Target creature gets +1/+1 for each type of basic you have. So it's basically a functional reprint of Might of Alara. And I just wanted to highlight that because now Domain Zoo has 8 copies of this effect if they want to. And you may ask, when's the last time you see somebody cast this card, like the Might of Alara? And my answer is I saw it in Copenhagen next to me. So that's why I remember that the card even existed. So there are some people out there that want to play Zoo. And I think Might of Alara was always one of the most explosive cards in the deck. And maybe the right way to build a deck, rather than a mid-range, a bit clunky pile of cards, you can play a very fast deck like that can kill on turn 3 quite easily. Like if you go Territorial Cav on 2 and then you have a bunch of Might of Alaras and double strikers in there, like you can kill on turn 3 quite reasonably. So maybe that's the direction for the deck. And do you have anything to add, or like it's fairly straightforward, I think?
I like the art.
Okay. And next, my second honorable mentions is Karn Silex. It's a 3-mana legendary artifact. It enters the battlefield tapped. Players can pay life to cast spells or to activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. So it turns off fetch lands, most notably. And it has X, tap, exile, Karn Silex, destroy each non-permanent with mana value X or less. Activate only as a sorcery. So it's sort of a Pernicious Deed-ish card. You can find it with Karn. It's not as mana consuming as Oblivion Stone. If you want to sweep cheap spells, cheap things, so that might be important. And it exiles itself, which means you can grab it again with Karn, which is also quite nifty. It might be more of a Pioneer card after all, but we'll see. It's an interesting card that might play well with Karn. So yeah, like it only makes sense.
I'm thinking about the line, like if you have turn 3 Tron, you go Card-Create Creator into Karn's Silex, whatever. And there are some decks that just fall to this. For instance, Yavmot, I guess?
Yeah, because of the static effect, right?
Yeah, and maybe the game is not over because they can just like, still attack with the creatures, but it's very, very hard. Like, Yavmot was already... They had already problems with Pithing Needle, and this looks even better because it also stops other abilities, yeah?
Like fetch lands, mostly fetch lands, because usually this type of card says pay life or sacrifice creatures. This one doesn't, so it doesn't stop Greased, for example, the minus of Greased. But yeah, it's still a pretty decent card, I think. And now we will move on towards our actual top 5. And number 5 is Vodalian Hexcatcher, which is another lord from the cycle we already mentioned. It's 1 and a blue, Merfolk Wizard, flash, other Merfolk gets +1/+1, and sacrifice a Merfolk, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1, and it's 1/1. Okay, Sodek.
Yeah. Okay,
do you think this card is very strong and will bring Merfolk back to being the absolute tier 3 deck instead of being tier 7?
I think that M. Hayashi, like when he saw this card, he had to jump like crazy from his room. Nikachu is probably very, very happy about this Merfolk, and the power level is here. Like, let's compare this card to Master of the Trident, yeah, the other 2-mana Lord. This has a better casting cost because you can use, for example, Mutavault to cast this. It has flash, so it plays much better against Fury because it's like Fury is a sorcery speed removal. So every time you keep 2 mana open, the Fury opponent will have to be very careful about what they are doing. So maybe Merfolk players will stop playing Subtlety and instead they will play Merfolk. They will do similar things, yeah. Who knows? And the ability is quite strong, actually. Sacrifice a Merfolk, counter non-creature spell. Like that's not only an ability on the Lord. If this wording would be sacrifice Vodalian Hexcatcher, counter target non-creature spell, it will be quite bad. But you can sacrifice any other merfolk. That's huge in my opinion, because
Yes.
now you can lower your curve and just attack early with creatures, and then make sure that the opponent won't, for example, combo kill you, and like keep this mana leak separated into 3 piles, and just
Yep.
win.
Yeah, I think it's quite
Oh,
good. I think the flash aspect of the card gets even better with the more flash merfolks you have in your deck. You already have merfolk trickster. So now, if your opponent passes you the turn with 2 mana open and they are playing merfolk, they can have trickster, they can have Vodalian Hexcatcher, they can even have a counter spell. Like some builds of merfolks do play actual factual counter spell or similar cards. So it makes playing against them a bit harder. So yeah. I think the card is quite good. It doesn't solve the biggest problem of Merfolk, which is being on the draw against Ragavan, of course. But it's a good card elsewhere. And also when the like Ragavan matchup is fine. So like it's a lord. Okay. Next up, we do have card that Sodek does not believe in ever so slightly. And it's Rona's Vortex. It's instant for 1 blue mana. It's a kicker for 2 and a black. It returns target creature or planeswalker you don't control, which is the line of text that tilts me so much, because you should be able to bounce your own stuff, but you can't, to its owner's hand. If this spell was kicked, put that permanent on the bottom of its owner's library instead. So, there was a card called Bloodchief's Thirst that I had very high hopes of in Zendikar Rising, I think. And it didn't deliver. Mostly because paying 4 mana on sorcery speed to deal with stuff is a lot of mana, especially in like blue-black decks. And this card is basically what I think Bloodchief's Thirst always wanted to be. Like that's actually the card I imagined Bloodchief's Thirst will be when I looked at it for the first time. So to me, Unsummon might seem quite weak to people, but if you ever got your Murktide Regent bounced, you know how, like, it's not the same as killing it, of course, but quite often, especially if you have like Murktide Regent of your own, bouncing opposing Murktide Regents is pretty close to killing them. And the fact that this can bounce a Planeswalker as well is pretty huge in my opinion, because it gives you more game against like Ren and 6 on the draw and stuff like that. Teferi. I think the Ren and 6 situation is like the most problematic because it requires you to have the most like specific card, because even on the draw against Teferi you can still have the actual counter spell, and against Ren you have to have like Spell Pierce or Spell Snare or a card like that. And you don't really need to be very heavy in black to play this card, I think. Like, I suspect that people will try. I will try definitely, but it's completely feasible to play it in like a otherwise non-black blue deck with like 1 Triumph and 1 Watery Grave or something. Like, for example, people have been playing Fire Ice and Blue-White. You can play this card in the same way. And Blue-White is a deck that lacks cheap interaction in general, especially against like early planeswalkers like Ren and 6. Because if you can Prismatic Ending, of course, but then you are tapping out on your turn, and then it can Teferi and snowball the advantage, yada yada yada. It's also a card that I might be trying in Murktide. I think it's pretty okay. Like playing two black sources is a bit of a cost, but it's not too much, I think. So because you are not full on splashing, you're just playing like a bunch of 2 lands or something. So yeah, I am pretty excited about this card for both Modern and Pioneer. We won't be talking about it in the Pioneer section because it only would be an honorable mention, and I make the rule myself that we don't talk about cards in honorable mention segment if they are already on the list from the other format, to save us time.
That's a good.
Yeah.
That's a good type.
So, yep, I am pretty excited about this card. I think it was my number 2 from the set. I think it will be actually pretty great. Not as good as the first one. We will get to it. But yeah, I am pretty excited.
I am the opposite of excited, and I totally don't see this card being played. But Jędrek got it on the second place, so it had to stay on the list. Like, this is a typical move from Jędrek.
No, I am genuinely
put
excited about cards that I'm putting on my list.
put irrelevant blue cards very high, so even when other people don't have them, they are somewhere in the list.
No,
yeah?
I am actually excited to have this card in the format. And once again, it's a pretty shallow set for modern. Like, if it was like
That's true.
a stronger set, then it probably wouldn't be that high on my list. But
Like, it wouldn't be in the list of New Capenna. Because like once we realized that New Capenna had a lot of cards to add, Hers, Shredder,
that's it.
like some. Okay, so maybe not that much.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but like from a stronger set, like I don't know, Eldraine
War
or
of the
whatever.
Spark.
War of the Spark. Yes. Okay. Moving on to number 2 on our list, or number 3 rather. We have a card that Sodek is quite excited about, and it's Randveld Hortmaster. It's a Goblin Lord, 1 and a red. Goblin Warrior, other goblins get +1/+1. It's 1/1 itself, and it has a triggered ability whenever Randveld Hortmaster or another goblin you control dies. Exile the top card of your deck. If it's a goblin creature card, you may cast that card until the end of your next turn. It seems very strong, Sodek.
Yes, it is. We were talking already about how the new set of lords help against removal when you are playing a tribal deck, and this is a perfect example of this. Like you're playing this guy, you pump your other creatures, even if the opponent plays Fury on like for 0 to kill your 2 creatures, you will most likely get 1 or 2 cards back from this. So the floor is quite high in my opinion. Like this is a lord that has a very relevant ability later in the game. It costs only 2 mana. So like in my opinion, the biggest problem with goblins before this set it was that it had a too high mana curve, and lowering this mana curve is the like priority thing to do if you want to make your goblin deck better. So in my opinion, the deck shouldn't play that many 4-drops, and instead it should focus on other like cheaper cards that can also create card advantage, and Hordmaster is exactly what the deck needed. But there's also one way to abuse this card. There is a card in a format called Skilled Prospector, and 1 mana, 1/1, sacrifice a goblin, add red. And there are some other cards from old times. If some of you maybe remember Fecundity Goblins or the deck called Dirty Kitty, there was a deck that had a bunch of rituals. Skilled Prospector, Mogwar Marshal. This is a goblin for 2 mana. When it enters the battlefield, create a token, and it has Echo for 2. So essentially, for 2 mana, you got 3 goblins. So you could pay it for 2 mana, sacrifice from it for free Skill Prospector to get 3 mana. So it was essentially a ritual, and with Fecundity on board, it was giving you 3 cards. And Hordmaster is just a better Fecundity card. In my opinion, like we would never play Fecundity in Modern in 2022, but playing a Fecundity that's 1 mana cheaper, that's a creature, and that gives a pump to all of your other goblins is quite reasonable in my opinion. So I can see Goblin being a double combo deck. We still have the combo of Snoop, like how was it?
Conspicuous Snoop.
Yes, conspicuous Snoop. Plus the second
Bogart
I forgot.
Herbinger.
Thanks. We still have this combo, but we can also add Hordmaster, Skill Prospector, and other cheap goblins just to be able to maybe not go off in terms of like playing empty warrants, etc., but to create an overwhelming advantage out of nowhere. Because playing Mokor Marshal, just to again lower the curve, playing Skill Prospector, because it's just a good card, can be too terrible with Goblin Matron, etc. It's, in my opinion, a very interesting line of attack, because now you have the potential to turn free from two different directions while still having a low curve and a nice combat if the combo does not come out.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, my only issue with likening Hordemaster to Fecundity is that you can't play empty the Warrens off of it, which you mentioned. So you won't like go off in the same sense that Fecundity deck did. But yeah, that's true. You can just make like, I don't know, present 4 or 5 creatures, and if you manage to hit like a lord that grants haste, this is already a lord. You are very likely to kill in one turn because you have 2 lords at least. So yeah, I think that Hordemaster is pretty great. Let's move to the second card on our list, which is Temporary Lockdown. It's an enchantment for 3 mana, 1 and 2 white, and whenever or when Temporary Lockdown enters the battlefield, exile each non-land permanent with mana value 2 or less until Temporary Lockdown leaves the battlefield. So it's a mass Oblivion Ring for things that cost 2 or less.
I heard the name Anger of the Halls.
Anger of the Halls, okay.
Like portable hall, Anger
Yes,
of
yes.
the Cats. You know, combined, they create this great name for the card, and actually it does what it thinks it to.
How about Hidetsugu Consumes Hall? Because it works similarly to Hidetsugu Consumes All.
Kind of nice, but you don't have next chapters. So Under of the Halls is clearly better, in my opinion.
Yeah, but there is not a card called God that only deals with one creature. The same way that Anger of the Gods would kill all the creatures. So I think Hidetsugu Consumes Whole is better, and it's a better wordplay. So I will stick with that. And I am mentioning Hidetsugu Consumes All only because I've heard some people I've talked about Modern with, like in Merktide and in general, and some of them were pretty high on splashing black in Merktide to play this card, Hidetsugu Consumes All, from the sideboard against Hammer, because it's a pretty tough matchup. And this card serves a pretty similar role there. It's even better probably, because Hammer players won't be able to really answer Temporary Lockdown. Maybe they will start playing answers, but this requires them to get them, and I don't think there is one that's tutorable with Urza Saga the same way like Pithy Needle is to stop Temporary Lockdown. So yeah, I think this will be a great card against Hammer specifically from like sideboard of white decks.
Yes.
And that's about it, I think.
Yeah, like I don't see, like maybe if goblins become a real force, that will be also a really good.
Yeah, like if you get paired against goblins or elves or merfolk or whatever tribal deck you can imagine, or against like other saga creature decks like Affinity, you will sideboard this card in. But its primarily use will be to kill Hammer or to deal with Hammer.
You have this card in your sideboard. Do you side it in versus Rhinos?
That's exactly what I wanted to ask you. I think it depends, but I can see that. Like depending on if I'm playing blue-white control, I'm probably not doing that. But if I'm playing like I don't know, like an Dominaria deck that we've talked about a while ago that doesn't interact that well on the stack, I think I am bringing Lockdown in. Yeah,
there's a risk of the opponent going a violent outburst end of turn and attack you for 8, but you know.
Yeah, like it's a playable card in the matchup. I don't think it's super. It doesn't mesh well with counter spells basically because it's 3 mana on Sorcerer Speed, and it can be countered. But yeah, like from the right deck, I think it's a card that's okay against Rhinos. Okay. Or if you sweep both, like 4 Rhinos, that's great, of course. Okay, continuing the trend of white enchantments being good for Modern in this set, our number 1. Undisputed number 1, both of us had it in the first position, is Leyline Binding. It's a 6 mana, 5 and a white enchantment with flash and domain. It costs 1 less for each basic land type you control, and it's an Oblivion Ring. So when it enters the battlefield, you exile non-permanent for as long as Leyline Binding is in play. So it's basically, if you start with Triumph, and you have a corresponding land type on the second turn, which is basically what every 4-color deck wants to do anyways. It costs 2 mana on turn 2 or even 1 if you're playing like Domain Zoo or something. It actually has not 4 but 5 types. Like you can actually play, I don't know, blue-white and go Triumph into off-color Shockland and Binding on 2, which is actually the actual good reason to play off-color Shockland in blue-white. But of course, just in 4-color, it's also a pretty great card. It can also make you splash colors of Triumphs in other decks. Like if you are playing, I don't know, a white deck that plays fetch lands and is 2 colors. Can you help me, Sodek? Is there such a deck?
Maybe differently. You're playing a heavy red deck that splashes a lot of things, for example, creativity. This
Yes,
maybe
exactly.
from this side. Your very light splash anyway, and your splash actually does something more than a 3 mana sorcery planeswalker that maybe does something in form of Teferi Time Raveler. In my opinion, Leyline Binding is a much better card for creativity than Teferi Time Raveler.
I don't know. Like, I think the biggest problem with Teferi, we actually had this discussion yesterday with Canister and Homik and our other friends, because Homik is playing creativity, and he was wondering whether Teferi is as bad as we told him he is. And we said to him that, dude, Teferi is not bad. Sacred Foundry is bad. Like, if Teferi costed 1 blue-red instead of 1 blue-white, you would play 4 copies in creativity and will be very, very happy with it, because its passive is really good in creativity. It's just a good card, and the problem is that you have to stretch your mana to do so. But maybe now with 2 cards that are good, or potentially good, it is actually worth to play this additional color, or maybe you want to ditch green altogether. That's also an option. Like, Ren is pretty great, but...
Yeah, Ren is great. That's true.
But maybe.
Binding is also quite potent. There's also one thing about this card I would like to tell. This costs 6 mana. 6 mana is more than 3. That means that it can be played in Cascade decks.
Like Resurgent Belief.
What is Resurgent Belief?
It's the white Cascade from Mage 2 that returns enchantments.
What?
And that's an enchantment.
Okay. We have this. I don't see this being played in Living End that much, but I can see it. Like there was a moment in the metagame when 4-color Rhinos was a real force. We had the Teferi, Omnat, some other white cards, and it was quite decent. And I think that turn 1 Triumph into turn 2 Binding into turn 3 Rhinos looks like a very powerful line to me.
Actually looks decent, yes.
So I don't know, maybe it's time to reconsider this 4-color Rhinos list. Also, I would think about this card in Gleam's deck, because again, you can start with Triumph, although Gleam's deck doesn't like Triumphs that much, but maybe with this card, you go Triumph, you go Leyline Binding on turn 2, that means you have another permanent, that means the opponent's start is much slower, and you threaten them with like Glimpse for 1 more permanent. Okay, they will get the creature back, but
it's most likely like Ragavan or whatever, and you have whole board and Ragavan is invalidated but that point.
And then you start, and then you maybe find another Leyline Binding and just card this creature anyway and get other things to do.
Yeah, Leyline Binding seems like a card with a really high potential.
Yeah, especially
for Modern. Okay. To reiterate, our top 5 for Modern is number 5, Vodalian Hexcatcher, number 2 for Rona's Vortex, number 2, or number 3 rather, Runeveld Hordemaster, number 2, Temporary Lockdown, number 1, Leyline's Binding. Okay, moving up on to Pioneer, with similar list, 4 honorable mentions and 5 positions on our list. Our first honorable mention is Joint Exploration, which is an instant for 1 and a blue with kicker for 1 green. It scries 2, then you draw a card, and if this spell was kicked, you may put a land from your hand into the battlefield. So it's basically a crossover between Growth Spiral and Preordain. Yes.
Yeah. And I really like the card. I don't know if there will be a deck that will be able to use it. Like Wireless Reclamation would be great here, but it's not in the format anymore. So maybe it will be hard to find this effect. But if you have like 8 copies of the similar effect, maybe there's some like this will give these blue green decks more stability. So maybe we can find something. I don't know exactly what, and it's pretty hard for me to guess, but the card has a potential.
Maybe it's a Lotus field card. It can ramp it. Like it's a country that can ramp if you need it to do. Who knows? Who knows?
Maybe instead of Shimmer of Possibilities, something like this.
You also have an actual impulse in this set that's just better than Shimmer because it's an instant instead of sorcery,
but
right?
Maybe this card is better because this card like sees 3 cards by itself. It's also an instant. Like it's 3 compared to 4. Okay, it's always better to have 4, but this kicker ability is something that can be quite decent.
Yeah, maybe, especially if you have to interact heavily on turn 1 and 2. Like you actually have to play like Dispute, or maybe they will discard something and your draw is slower. It's both a cantrip and a ramp if you need it. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also, like the fact is that that you draw a card, then you play a land from
So you can find a land and yes.
Yeah, you can find Lotus Field and go for it.
Yes. Okay. Next up we have Ether Channeler, which is 3 mana, 2 and a blue, human wizard, 2 and 1. And when it enters the battlefield, you can choose one of 3 modes. It creates a 1/1 bird token with flying. It returns target non-land permanent, another target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, or you can draw a card. So, what type of deck did you have in mind, Sodek, when you chose this card?
Collected Company. Like
humans,
this card,
like banned humans, or
maybe humans, maybe just good stuff.
Like in standard, right?
Something like
deck.
this.
Okay.
I don't know if this will be good enough, but the card with so many options, like all of these options aren't especially great. But when like the fact that you can choose whatever the best in the situation is great.
Yeah, it's basically like it's worse than Reflector Mage, of course, when you just want to bounce, but it's a not bad approximation of Reflector Mage, but also when you are playing like a mirror match against other creature decks, but it's also a Silver Jill Adept against Red Black, for example, which is pretty great.
Yeah.
Okay. Next up, we have 2 of my own honorable mentions, a set of 4 mana legendary creatures. The first one is Ertai Resurrected. It's 2 blue and black legendary creature, Phyrexian human wizard. It says flash. And when Ertai Resurrected enters the battlefield, choose up to 1. First one is counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. Its controller draws a card. And the second one is destroy another target creature or planeswalker. Its controller draws a card. So the curve I'm most interested in is playing Narset on 2 and on 3 and playing this on 4, so they don't draw a card. And you have a Mystic Snake or a Shriekmaw.
Nice.
And like, I definitely will be exploring some Narset decks, like blue-black Narset decks with Liliana. So who knows? Who knows? I think this card has a pretty high potential. It's like Mystic Snake that also plays to the board. Of course, drawing a card is a rather significant downside. But it can just do so many things. Like it can counter triggers. It can counter you can counter I don't know, an ultimate of a planeswalker that your opponent has on the board, or you can counter. I don't know. If you have a lot of mana, you can counter ward, discard a card on Trespasser if you want to. Like you have 5 mana with a fetch land, like with the Fabled Passage, you go Fatal Push and then this to counter the ward, or you can just kill this, whatever. Doesn't matter. In general, I think it's a pretty great card with Narset. Like, sadly, you can't find it with Narset because it's a creature, but if there is like the blue-black mid-rangey control-ish Narset deck in Pioneer, I think this card will be pretty great in it.
I also think that like this card can be quite good if you find your triggers you want to counter, because it doesn't mean that you need to
Yes.
counter opponent's triggers. So when you counter your like bad trigger and you draw a card in the process and you have a free to body in the process too,
Yes.
that looks really great. So maybe that's the approach we should
Yes.
try to find with the card.
Yes, or
But
if you just have like a spare body lying around, like some sort of creature with ETB effect that you already got what you wanted from like Stitcher Supplier, for example. Well, not necessarily Stitcher Supplier, but this type of thing. You can draw a card. You can counter the delayed trigger of returning Parhelion to hand, if I am not mistaken. But you usually kill with one Parhelion, and it's already the turn you play Gracefang for 3 mana, so that's not that great. It's also like filthy good with blink effects. Like having this type of card with blink effects is just pretty insane. Okay. Moving on to my second honorable mention, it is Astor Bearer of Blades, which is a 4 mana legend, 2 red-white human warrior. It's 4/4, and when it enters the battlefield, you look at top 7 cards of your library. You may reveal an equipment or vehicle card from among them into your hand, and the rest is going to the bottom in random order. And your equipments have equip 1, and your vehicles have crew 1. And many people, including Sodek, has been trying out Hammer at various points in Pioneer, and this is actually the card that might be enough to make Hammer great, because the bottleneck of this deck was always the fact that you didn't have too many good ways to attach your hammers, because you basically only have Sigarda's 8 and probably some other cards that are very, very bad to play.
3 mana, free to ogre, and you can for 0 mana attach an equipment, something like this. Or you had cards that's a trick, like +2/+2, and when it's a warrior or soldier, something
Yes,
like
I
this,
think
you can
warrior.
attach an equipment. It was so horrible. Like the deck had 10 free kills. That was cool. When you had Sigarda's 8 hammer and a creature, that was super fun. But
this card might make Hammer pretty okay. Okay. Moving on to our actual top 5. Yes, Sodek?
no, I was
Okay.
typing for
Okay.
top 5.
Number 5, we cheated for the first time in this list. We have all the lords, because we don't really have one that is like. If we had to pick, I think we agreed that the Elvish Lord is probably the best for Pioneer, but none of them are like super hype. I think if the Soldier's Lord were Human Lord, we would have totally different discussion. But it's a Soldier Lord, so, and it's not even a human itself; it's core, so. It doesn't even play in with human soldiers profitably.
So we have 5 lords. Valiant Veteran, so a white lord, and Shadow Right Priest, a black lord, are like they have relevant abilities, but like I don't feel that the support for their tribes, respectively soldiers and clerics, is big enough. So we are talking only about merfolk, goblin, and elves. And in my opinion, all comes down to how you can support them. And Elf Lord has the best support because it has 8 really good 1-drops in form of Elvish, Mystic, and Land of Elves. So I don't know if there are any good goblins for 1 mana, like really good. It's not Legion Loyalist or something like this. Like
Skill
really,
Prospector.
Maybe that's the thing. About shouldn't say that. Speaking of, I'm trying. Kendrick. Speaking
That's
of merfolks, there's a green one that can be a 2/2 guy if you
the
have
1
an
mana.
eye.
Kumena's Speaker. When you have a merfolk or an island, it's a 2/2.
And I think there's another 1-drop merfolk that's reasonable, but I don't remember exactly which one.
That might be the case.
So maybe merfolks can be quite good. Like I strongly believe
and
that
you have
elves
2
will
lords, right? Because you have the Mist Binder, the blue-green lord, and you have this
one for
because
so
Master of Peril Trident is like from M12, right? It's not in Pioneer.
Yeah, I'm not that familiar with strange cards, so hard to say.
Strange card.
I strongly believe that Elf deck has enough tools. Like it has eight lords, 8 mana dorks, Realm Walker, Collected Company, and you can fill it with other 1 and 2 drops, and the deck should be fine, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Like I don't
and
know if it will contest.
Warmaster
Mhm.
is the one from Kaldheim that makes a token and pumps. It's Warmaster, I think. It also makes that you not having Azuri is much less of a problem because you do have a mana sink on a card. That's also great.
True. So I'm pretty excited about elves, and I will try to make them great again.
All right.
See.
Number 4 on our list is Combat Research, which is a 1 blue aura, and enchanted creature has, whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card, and as long as enchanted creature is legendary, it gets +1/+1 and has word 1. This is basically a trinket text, I think, about being legendary. I don't think, because this is the card that will slot into the mono blue spirits deck. And I don't think there are.
This is functionally curious obsession, and
yes, I don't think there are any legendaries in that deck, so that line of text does not matter. But having 8 or up to 8 curiosity effects for your creatures is a big deal, because the draws in which you have curious obsession and the ones in which you don't are night and day. It's like,
yeah. So how many curious obsessions will you play in this deck? 8 copies?
I would start
Probably
with 8, or I would start with 8, and then I would shave from there if I find out that 8 is too much. I think probably the equilibrium is like, I don't know, 7 or 6, but I would start with 8 just to be safe.
Like I totally see cutting some 2 drops and focusing more on 1 drop into curious obsession plus plus a protection, just to keep attacking, drawing cards, and play more into this. So again, I think this card is extremely good, only 1 archetype, but it will help already a good deck in the format to be even better.
Yes. Next up, number 3 on our list is a card that most people know very well. It's Liana of the Veil. For those of you who don't know the card, it's a 3 mana planeswalker. It costs 1 and 2 black mana. It enters with 3 loyalty counters, +1. Each player discards a card, -2. Target player sacrifices a creature, and -6. You separate permanents that target player owns or controls rather into 2 piles, and they choose which pile they get to keep and which pile they have to sacrifice. So Liana was actually my number 1, and I think it was number 5 at Sodec list, so it ended up being number 3 in our overall list. And I can see Liana not being super great in Pioneer. Like, it's definitely a scenario that can happen, but I have faith. I think Liliana will be a really important part of Pioneer. And I'm excited because I do like the card. I've played with the card in many decks, mostly fairies, but also in standard. So I am excited to see what Liliana brings to Pioneer.
Yeah, the thing with Liliana is that we are thinking about this card in terms of like how good it was in the past, but right now there are much more effects that can cantrip or that can like create card advantage in the other way. So I believe that Liliana can be maybe not outclassed, but it's not as great as we think the Liliana was in when we are comparing it to standard, to old modern days, etc. I strongly believe that this will be a really good sideboard card. For instance, if I'm playing red black sacrifice and like someone like there were players who played Obnixilis in the sideboard, and I just hate Obnixilis as a card, so I will be very happy to cut them and try like 2 Liliana's sideboard. Or you are playing Greasefang decks and you want to play a more mid-range approach. Liliana is perfect here because if you draw Parhalion, you can just plus and discard it, and you can try to control the board with the minus of
Yeah,
Liliana.
I think Liliana is a main deck card in Grease Funk. I think it will be great
Can
in
be,
that deck.
but it will be like the deck will have to be rebuilt. It's not like I don't believe it will fit that well into current Abzan lists. So maybe Mard will be a thing. Like then you have Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Indiana as free drops. That looks really good. Oh, and Grisfunk, of course.
You can
So
also
that
also play Esper with the next card on the list, I guess, because I think the next card is pretty great. We'll
yes,
talk
like
about
the
it in a
next
moment.
card is the next card is probably the most impactful card for Pioneer for this set. That's my opinion. Outside lands, of course.
Yeah.
And like I'm maybe we can just tell about this card already.
Yeah,
What
because
is-
there's not much else to talk about when it comes to Liliana.
we just know the card and like we'll see if it will
Yeah,
it will
most people
fit
know
in
what
the...
Liliana does, what it can do. So we'll just move on to our second position on the list, which is Founding of the Third Path, or Founding the Third Path, rather. It's a saga for 1 and a blue. It has the new saga mechanic called Read Ahead, where you can play it and you can skip to whatever chapter you want to start with. The ones that you skipped does not trigger, but you can just go straight to number 3. So, for example, if Read Ahead was on Erza Saga, you could just tutor instantly instead of making dudes. And Founding of the Third Path has first chapter. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value 1 or 2 from your hand without paying its mana cost. It's not turless. It's important to notice. It's not. You can't cheat null cost spells with it.
Yeah, that was my first assumption. Like I was
Yeah.
like, OMG, we have asked for told
Yeah.
like 2-0, but no.
Chapter 2 is target player mills for cards, and chapter 3 is exile target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, copy it. You may cast the copy, and you have to pay mana for that copy, in case you got too excited. Okay, I think that this card will be very good in Pioneer because it plays with two of the best blue cards in the format, which is Ledger Shredder and more importantly Treasure Cruise. Because if you play Shredder on 2 and you play Founding on 3, you will get to play a cheap spell from your hand and you will trigger Connive, which is not that easy to do in Pioneer. You often has like for example, you play Shredder on 2 and then you have 2 2-drops and you can't Connive. And now you can play Founding and then play a 2-drop off of it. And maybe you even find a 1 mana card. Then you will usually target yourself with the second chapter, of course. So it fuels your Treasure Cruise, it mills your Phoenixes, it mills your Grease Funks and Parhelions. It's a pretty decent like filler chapter because like I think most sagas have this one like filler chapter that you are not that interested in, like throughout the history of sagas. And I think this is a pretty good filler chapter. And the third one is exile target instant or sorcery. And the card I'm most excited to cast with this is obviously Treasure Cruise, because you can just delve and you can cast it for 1 mana. So it's basically like a missions briefing, Snapcaster, Mage type effect that's actually doing other things, which is pretty great. So yeah, I will be exploring various Ledger Shredder Founding Treasure Cruise decks, and I think these decks will be really good.
Yeah, like casting more Treasure Cruises looks quite powerful, and I would like to think about something else, like maybe something with Grease Funk, etc. But the reality is that just cast your Ancestrals, draw more cards, and you should be fine. So
Yes.
I'm
Well,
a
that's
bit worried
like-
about the addition of the format. The Phoenix deck is already fine. It's in a fine spot, and like adding something that can break Treasure Cruise is scary.
Well,
in my opinion.
After the first Treasure Cruise, you are usually in a pretty great position anyway, so maybe you don't need to cast. Maybe second one is the overkill. I really like this card in blue-black decks because you have so many great 1 mana cards in black. Like you can play Thoughtseize off of it. you can play, I don't know, Tainted Indulgence. You can play actually pretty decent cards. So I don't know. I'm excited about this card, and I hope it will be great. And with that, we can jump to our first place, which are Painlands. Unsurprisingly, friendly Painlands, or allied Painlands rather, to be precise. And I made an assumption, like I'm basically speaking about all 5 of them, even though only 3 are printed in the set, and it tilts me so much. I have no idea why WotC did it, because like there is a precedence, because Painlands, or not Painlands, Pathways were also printed in like 6+4 sets, but it doesn't make sense if you are like, you only need to reprint 5 of them, and you have a big Pioneer tournament coming, like in a regional championship, and people won't be able to test 2 of those Painlands because they will be existing during the tournament, because the tournament will be the first week of legality of Painlands that aren't here now, but they don't get to play with them for this 2 months. So that's extremely tilting. So the new Painlands that we are getting are red-green, red-black, and blue-white, and we'll have to wait for blue-black and white-green till the next set. Yeah, nothing else to add about Painland, other than the fact that they will be playable, and that I'm tilted that we are not getting all 5 of them.
Yeah, that's the bummer. Overall, like everything that can help Pioneer's mana base is a good thing, especially if the land doesn't enter the battlefield tapped because it's cringe. Like make aggressive or proactive decks better, because
Yes.
know, like if you have to play mono decks because your mana base don't support your like aggressive 2 mana combinations well enough, then there's something to improve.
Yes. So yeah, but like I can easily see Founding being more impactful than Painlands, but we just put it on the first place. I think partially because of, like, Sodek had Painlands in the first place. I've had Painlands in third place. And I think it's partially because we are so tired of the mana inequality of Pioneer.
Yes.
So
I'm playing like red-black mana base is just a joke, in my opinion. Like, or like blue-white mana bases. Like will blue-white control use a darker ways? Probably not, anyway.
I think there's a chance. Maybe not for like blue-white control. I think blue-black would play Underground River, but it's hard to cast Absorb with, like, because blue-white is pretty, I think, heavy on colored sources, and blue-black has more colorless. So, yep. Okay.
That's good enough.
So to sum it up, our Pioneer list is number 5, Lords, number 4, Combat Research, number 3, Liliana of the Veil, number 2, Foundry. I said Foundry here in our plic, but it's Founding. Founding of the third path, or rather Founding the third path. Number 1, Painlands. And to reiterate our modern list, so we have Pioneer list on top of Sodek, when you see this video, and modern list on top of me. We'll have number 5, Vodalian Hexcatcher, number 4, Rona's Vortex, number 3, Runewald Hordemaster, number 2, Temporary Lockdown, number 1, Leyline Binding. And that's it. Just a bit over 1 hour. These were our impressions of Dominaria United cards for Modern and Pioneer. If you are interested in the rest of our content, check out our videos on YouTube, and links down in the description. There is a link to our website. There are links to our socials and Twitch streams. Thank you so much for watching, as always. Take care, and bye-bye.
See ya.